Now, 65 years ago this week, a deafening roar of joy surged up from the massive crowd at Tafawa Balewa Square in Lagos when the British Union Jack was brought down, the green, white and green Nigerian flag was raised, and the Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa, accepted from the British Crown the symbols of Nigeria's independence. The unequivocal feeling among many in that crowd, both British and Nigerian, was that Nigeria, a nation blessed with natural resources and hard-working people, was going to become a world power in a few years, with one animated illustration portraying this country as a giant bursting out of its chains. But within 6 years of accepting those constitutional instruments of independence, Prime Minister Balewa was dead, assassinated in a coup, the first in a series that would devastate this country, leading to a civil war and some of the most violent moments in Nigeria's history. Since then, needless to say, many of the hopes Nigerians had at independence have been dashed. Well, Bishop Matthew Hassan Kukah grew up in that period around Nigeria's independence. He is the Catholic Bishop of Sokoto and one of this country's most respected civil rights figures. And for decades, he's been conspicuous for his gallantry in pursuing truth and justice and fearless in his unfettered encouragement of Nigeria's leaders to do the right thing. And Bishop Kukah joins me now in the studio. Bishop Kukah, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I know you've had a very busy time, so we really appreciate your taking the time to talk to us. So 65 years ago, the dawn of a new age. What do you remember of that new age for Nigerians after the British conceded independence? A time of hope, confidence, belief in this country?
Well, when I look back now, mine was years of innocence. I think I was 5 or 6. I don't remember. But
yeah, I was going to say, I wonder if you were out.
I remember, then. But let me tell you what I remembered. The first white person I had seen was a priest. The second white person I had seen in my life was a priest. So to hear our headmaster tell us about these horrible white people who had invaded our land, colonized us, we didn't know what he was talking about. And I couldn't imagine, because I hadn't seen any other bad white person. But what was for me more memorable was that it was in the celebration of October 1st that I got the first cup that I could call my own, because we were given little cups as part of the celebration. So as a child, I couldn't square the cycle. But coming back to where we are now, this incredible human being, Tafawa Balewa, when I go back to play the tape of his life and I listen to his speeches,
and that speech at independence,
tears almost always come to my eyes. And here was a man who Washington feted. Here was a man who, as the first African head of state, Time magazine made him Man of the Year, to point at where the rest of the world saw Nigeria going. Tragically, we ended up with a suicidal mission of the first military coup. And in my view, then as now, that is the scene of the crime. So if you're thinking about what is wrong with Nigeria, why we have ended up where we've ended up, that was where we lost our innocence.
But amidst all that hope, around 1960, before obviously the advent of the coup and all the rest of it, it must have been obvious to anyone who cared to look that this rich tapestry of ethnicities and religions and geographical divisions in this country meant that anyone trying to manage Nigeria would only be successful if they're able to manage that diversity.
I think that's an excellent point, but in fairness, the machinery had already been put in place. As a little kid, I remember, all we wanted to do was just to see what the Sardauna looked like. And in my little village, they were going around with these screens showing us all kinds of things. We had all the wonderful things. Then we had a bureaucracy that really was oblivious to some of the things that have now come to haunt us: ethnicity, religion, the hegemons, and so on and so forth. So we had everything we needed. And when people say to us about Nigeria, Why are we not like Singapore? Why are we not like Japan? Well, truth of the matter is that we could have been better than Singapore. We could have been better than Malaysia. Could have literally been better than, no one would have seen our back had the military not struck.
Right.
Because we already had a bureaucracy. The reason why Singapore is the way it is not because Lee Kuan Yew, yes, he did an extraordinary good job.
But it's that inherited bureaucracy.
He inherited bureaucracy.
Yes.
And the destruction of the bureaucracy, the destruction of society was escalated. Then ethnic identity and consciousness began to emerge. And I can tell you, most Northerners who are in their 70s and 80s still cannot come to terms with the brutal killing of the Sardauna and Tafawa Balewa. Unfortunately, we have a country that doesn't like to confront the truth. We often say as Africans, forgive and forget. And we bury the hatchet, but the handle is outside. So, in my view, up till today, we have not been able to have the time, the honesty, the sincerity to come to the table to say, look, what went wrong? And this is why what we have, the dreams of our fathers or founding fathers have now become nightmares for us. And we now ended up with a situation in which the recruitment process, whether it's for public life or the bureaucracy, all of those things came crashing. So I think we can say why we are where we are today.
And it's a very important point you make about the confronting the issues that have brought Nigeria to where it is. Because as you said, just a few years after celebrating that very auspicious start, I mean, the country was plunged into ethnic crisis, clearly showing that these deep divisions had been swept under the rug under sort of Britain, but they still remained rife. But the point is, Bishop, that, I mean, you talk about how painful this is for the North. However the reason these things came about, I mean, all sides have paid dearly in blood.
Absolutely,
they?
Absolutely. But you see, there is elite hypocrisy and also elite conspiracy, which is that Nigeria has just become a carcass, and all everybody does is to come to the table with long knives. And people are interested in the slices they are taking back to them, to their communities. So the sense of who we are as a nation has literally become invisible. And, when I speak about this, I speak with all the respect I can muster for the military and for those who have governed this country. But it's not about good soldiers or bad soldiers. It is that in the first place, the military never ought to have entered into politics. Now, book after book have been written that the soldiers themselves, I mean, tomorrow, this is not a commercial, but tomorrow I'm reviewing the book written by, the former Chief of Defense Staff, General Irabo. Now, you can see very clearly, because when people say, why are we not like Malaysia? Why are we not like India? I tell them, all of these Asian countries, is there any of them that suffered a military coup? None of them. And once all this came in, remember that as the wheels rolled, the military itself became a dysfunctional institution infested by maggots of ethnicity. Yes, infested by maggots of ethnicity. People now began to organize coups based on collective interests, and interests that were not necessarily national interests. And every time we took a step in that direction, two things happened. The first is that, morally speaking, and I will tell you because I'm a priest, okay, there cannot be a good or a bad rape. There cannot be a good rape. If you pulled a gun and shot somebody and took over power, you're no different from an armed robber. And once that system and process for getting into power became arbitrary, it depended on who pulled the gun first. And the military began an exercise in self-immolation, in which we lost some of the best brains in this country. They didn't trust themselves. You now ended up with people who were getting into power not because they had reflected, read a good book, thought about this country. They just got to power because they pulled the gun first. You then lost the moral authority, because you took violence to the stock market. And this is why when armed robbery comes, and you fast forward and find yourself where we are now, where the right to bear arms, those who had the monopoly of violence, once they lost that innocence, it then became legitimate that whoever pulls the gun first. So you couldn't shoot, okay, you shot people on Bar Beach, but you really shot them not because they were wrong, because you were holding what you yourself had stolen. So it became morally difficult for us to read the blackboard and square it with the teacher. So Nigerians are not bad people. We know how we got to where we are. Now, climbing back, this is after 30 years. So when you talk about the founding fathers of Nigeria, if you read Tafawa Balewa's speech, you go back and just read the speech and you see the kind of things he was saying about Nigeria, its hope and its future. So we still could have recovered lost ground.
I have to say, Bishop, that's an absolutely sterling analysis that you just gave there. But now it's 65 years later. The things that have happened. What is it that shapes the idea of what you think this country is today, given all that you've said?
You know, nation building is about mythology. It's not about reality. And America today is a myth.
The American dream.
The American dream.
The rest of it. Yeah.
But you see, Nigeria has not had the ability and the capacity to create a dream, to create
articulate
a vision,
that
to articulate.
vision.
And I've always said, for example, close your eyes and ask yourself, after the 1960 speech, whether there is a speech of any president of Nigeria that has made you feel, wow, or whether there is a speech that, like J.F. Kennedy's 1963 speech, that is so memorable that you have to ask yourself, what was I doing when this speech was delivered? That speaks to another dimension, which is what is the intellectual content of governance? Because once the soldiers, what the soldiers did, the soldiers, and you can see, so people like Wole Soyinka, all of our scholars can talk about this eloquently, that once the soldiers found that they couldn't win the intellectual argument, their scaffolding, they didn't allow intellect to become a dominant force. Therefore, as they said, people were teaching what they were not paid to teach. Okay? Once you discounted intellect, it meant that the whole question of imagination, okay, it's not for nothing that people like Plato, people like Aristotle, because people were spending time and thinking. Every organization, whether it's Nikon or whatever, is thinking about what am I going to do to make, and the people who designed this table, they're not here. We don't know them. The people who dream of what a good hotel should look like, they may not necessarily be here. So R&D is always a very important component, but those people are always in hiding. And once you decided that you came to power just like that, and then many people now tell you, where do we start? So every governor, you know, when people, Nigerians say, oh, the middle class has collapsed. But the middle class is not necessarily measured in Naira terms. Middle class is also about what is up here.
Absolutely.
You know, so for me, the rejection of the intellectuals and their contribution to policy is largely what is responsible. So you find people in government are trying, but they are trying only as best as they can. And occasionally you find somebody, a professor is maybe writing a speech for the wife of the first lady of a state. There are professors now who are finding themselves in position, they are so circumscribed, they can't extend the limits of their imagination because it is tied to they don't want to lose their job. So if you don't have that kind of a society where the thinkers are here, like Plato said, you know, the thinkers are here, and policy makers and policy implementers are here, you will not be able to, you know, I mean, make a country grow.
So, I mean, as I said, you know, I hate to repeat myself, but that's just brilliant. I mean, as you assess this country and look forward, clearly aware, as you correctly analysed there, that we've missed the boat that set sail in 1960. What's the abiding inspiration of your life now in Nigeria, given all these reproaches that you've outlined?
You know, I am thankful to God that I'm a man of hope. You know, I often say to myself, you know, God in His infinite mercy made me a priest. I probably would be dead by now because I would have been on the streets. There is a limit to how much injustice you can live with. And luckily, you know, I'm very lucky. I'm an average student, believe me. I'm an average student.
Come across
but I'm an average student. But no,
but we concede your humility.
I can explain to you. I'm an average student, but I work hard. The second, perhaps most important thing, more than my education, is that I've been educated on the streets. I've been extraordinarily lucky The Obi of Onitsha will open his palace to me. The Sultan of Sokoto will open his palace to me. We were together just the day before yesterday. The Emir of Kano will open his palace to me. The former president will open his house to me. So I have that extraordinary, it's not something I take for granted. But I'm sufficiently grounded because being a priest also puts me very much in touch with the poor. But I also see that this is not a country of bad people. Even those who are in power, there are a lot of good people allowing bad things to happen, largely because, again, the recruitment process. Too many people are finding themselves in power today without preparation.
You mentioned a point there about the poor. Is it the memory of the poverty that you see every day in Nigeria that propels you? Is it your outrage at the, if you like, hideously stunted life? Life chances that people born here are now faced?
Charles, this is an extraordinary country. People ask me, I travel the world, people say to me, where do you get your courage to talk about this country that is gone to the dogs? And I said, man, you've not seen anything yet. I am extraordinarily proud of this country. I also happen to know what people have accomplished on their own with their bare hands. Okay, I traveled to the east, I traveled to the west, I've traveled the length and breadth of this country. What is missing? It's like a man with a fantastic group of 11 players. Okay, but the coach not figuring out who to play or who to take out at what point at what time. What we have in Nigeria is that intellect has become something of envy. So if you got a first class, for example, you're not supposed to be talking about it. We can no longer have a measuring rod to say this is what competence and capacity entitles you to. You know, like they said of, it's not Einstein, what was this Irish man? I've forgotten his name again, whom they said when he was coming to England, and they asked him, what do you have to declare? He said, my genius. That's what I have to declare. This is not a country where you can say that because I feel that this is what I have the capacity to do. I know how I can fix the oil business, the oil industry, for example. I know how I can fix electricity in Nigeria. But you don't have that kind of space because the institution, depending on the possibility that is there, okay, if it is where the loot has been collected, then the children of those who are already in power will send they send their children there, not because of capacity, because this is running Nigeria like this, presiding over a distribution agency. So to come back to the point, it is that I see a country, I see it in the face of farmers. I see people who are so innocent but also so detached from the wealth of Nigeria, but they are working very hard and breaking their backs.
So given all that you see, what do you see as your mission in this country now? Is it to try and get the government, for instance, because we know you've been very outspoken, is it to try and get the government to be more sensitive to such deprivation and to make better provision to tackle the barriers in the way of a decent standard of living or something else?
To answer your question, let me just give you an example of what happened yesterday in Sokoto. No, is it yesterday or day before yesterday? Day before yesterday in Sokoto. I brought President Olusegun Obasanjo to Sokoto with the Sultan of Sokoto together to the Catholic facility. We commissioned a hall full of 250 laptops. Because I'm looking at them, people are telling me there are 10 million, there are 20 million, there are 25 million Almajiris. If they are 10, 15 or 20 years old, in 10 years time they're going to be 30 and 40. Every count starts with one. So if all I can do is to take out only one person from the queue, that's good enough for me. I travel around and believe me, I run into young people. I've met them severally. I remember running late to catch a flight in Sokoto. And somehow I was just like a few seconds. Then I remembered I forgot my phone. As I got to the aircraft, the pilot was walking around and he came, literally knelt down to greet me. And he said, I see you are looking very, I said, no, I forgot my phone. He said, where? He said, no, call your driver, let them bring your phone. I said, my driver is on his way, but he's still a while. He said, no, we'll wait for you. And I was so embarrassed. I stood there, But, you know, when I entered the aircraft, you know what the pilot said to me? The pilot looked at me. He said, you are the one who wrote a letter, a recommendation that gave me a job as a pilot over 10 years ago. You won't remember me. At the same aircraft, I'm walking to catch a plane. The pilot comes out and kneels before me and says, I was your altar server when you were in Lagos. Now, what I'm saying, coming by a long road, is I've never tried to exaggerate what I think people think of me. I mean, all the things I've been writing, my greatest shock was to even see that people were reading what I was saying. And I've also tried to realize that it is important to be on the streets, pounding the streets, but we also now have to open a window for negotiation.
Indeed. Well, let me just, move away slightly from that. We're running out of time, and I want to bring up two important questions, because that one of them, of course, is significant as a way of looking back at Nigeria since independence. One of the issues has always been the conflict, if you like, or perhaps rivalry is a better word, of the different religions in this country. You are a Catholic bishop. Some would say that you're in a raging sea in the heart of Islam, in sort of Sokoto and so on. But I mean, how do you think relations have evolved between the two religions since the 1960s? Because I mean, we heard recently the Americans saying that, you know, Christians are being massacred in Nigeria.
Well, you know, I can tell you many stories. But one of my favorite stories, which I often tell, is being at the airport in Abuja and being in the lounge. And I've never met John Pepe Clark. I was the first time I saw him. I looked at him. I didn't.
And he's a great writer from the Niger Delta.
But also the most important thing is I'm taller than him. I saw John Pepe Clark, and somebody said, that's John Pepe. So I got up to go and greet him. And then somebody says, you know, this is Bishop Kukah, is the Catholic bishop of the Diocese of Sokoto. And as I was about to shake John Pepe Clark, this gentleman came from nowhere. I didn't see him coming. I just said his agbada and literally separated our hands. He said, stop referring to him as the Catholic bishop of Sokoto. He's our bishop in Sokoto. He's not the Catholic bishop. He's not for the Catholics alone.
That's the ultimate acknowledgement.
When you have those kind of experiences, you can also feel nostalgic about how bad things have deteriorated. There are a lot of extraordinarily good people, but they are allowing terribly bad things to happen. If you go back and read Sardauna''s speech, for example, Tafawa Balewa's speech, he openly commended the work of the missionaries of the Catholic Church. But today, that same work, the schools we built have been taken over. In Kaduna, for example, the most prestigious school was St. John's College, where Nzogu went to, and Queen of Apostles. Those schools have been taken over and given Muslim names. And I often ask my Muslim friends, first of all, because there are no schools built, I don't know of any school that is built by a Muslim that is not, except in the Southwest, that is not either an Islamic school or whatever. But I've said to them, can you imagine if a Christian became president or governor and took over a school dedicated, that is named after Sardauna, and named it St. Thomas? What will happen? They say, no. So this is where we are. The tragedy with northern Nigeria. It is hurting, it is bleeding. People are living in destitution, but they are being mesmerized by people who entrepreneurs whose specialty is the weaponization of religion, who don't believe in the religion itself, who are doing well with their children because their children are in Catholic schools abroad. But these same people are not allowing the children of the poor. So to answer your question, it is to say to ourselves, no country can progress without education. Again, I keep repeating it. If you want, go to where I was born. You will not believe it. If it weren't because the Catholic Church gave me an opportunity to have an education, I would not be where I am today. And that is why when you see me so passionate about these things, it's because I'm convinced every little kid, every child should be able to have an opportunity. So what we did in Sokoto yesterday, I said publicly, the people we are calling Almajiris today, many of the ministers, if you are from northern Nigeria, you are an Almajiri at some point. Only that you got a chance. Now, I said, I am convinced that there is an Einstein among these Almajiris. I need to create an opportunity for that child. But of course, I know what is likely to happen. You know, there are those who are the merchants whose children are elsewhere who will tell you, Bishop Kukah has built this, so it's only for Christians. If you go there, you become a Christian. So we have still not, you know, and this tribe is growing. Right. If as today we have 25 million of these kids with no education, and they are going to have children who are going to have children, and as you know, in northern Nigeria, you can be anything from 10 children to 50 children to 40 children. Now, this country is not expanding. Look at the multidimensional poverty analysis done by the Bureau of Statistics, just for last month. It is Sokoto is 90%, Zamfara is 85%. All the areas that are contiguous with the far north of this country, where the Muslims are predominant, those areas are conterminous with the areas of destitution, poverty, neglect, and it's not. There's no other way to explain why it has become a crime scene today. So, I don't know, but just to say that if we can all make our own little contribution. I'm not a state, but I also don't expect the state to do everything. Right. And the greatest challenge for northern Nigeria and all the governors is, can you please open up the doors and let's see how we can collaborate with one another? Very important words. We've literally got less than a minute. And a quick question about Ogoni land, because I know that you've played a pivotal role in trying to bring about reconciliation there. What about this move by the federal government to return to Ogoni land? What's your perspective on that? Does that tick the boxes for you? It ticks the boxes, and I really want to thank President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, GCFR, for that spectacular decision. I mean, he has remained consistent in focusing on the issues of justice, in trying to close the doors to injustice, bigotry, those who manipulate ethnic and religious identity. As you can see, when I was during Oputa panel, when I went to Ogoni land, when we were in Ogoni land, my friend Ledu Miti and others, when they came to me, they said, Bishop Kukah, please, Father Kukah, they said, look, you are a minority like us, so we know you can understand our problem. Now, they have fixed our problem, or at least this government has started a process of fixing our problem in southern Kaduna. We now have a university. The Ogonis have a university. Right. Okay? This is how a country ought to be. And this is why, for me, the interesting thing is that, first of all, we have a vice president who was born after independence today. Okay? But we are seeing a government that is making nonsense of those who have use religion as a weapon of exclusion. And this is why, for me, all the agony, all the excitement about the Muslims are coming, Muslim ticket. Well, guess what? After all of this, I was lucky because I said to people, it doesn't matter to me who wins this election. As far as I'm concerned, if it is Tinubu as a president, I've known him for quite a long time, and I have a bit of an idea about where he stands on some of these issues. If it is Alhaji Kashim, I'd known him. We went, to Maiduguri when he was governor as members of the Bishops' Conference. He received us. There is no single state in the core north that can boast of having a Christian as a commissioner. Okay. But in Borno State, we counted 5 commissioners who were Christians. This is not in Abuja that I will come and say this kind of person, I'm looking at him about his Muslim credentials. We need to begin to focus on, and I think that this administration, with all its flaws, with all its weaknesses, it's not perfect, but we are seeing gradually a way of dealing with the issues of religion. And if you spare me a second, because you raised the issue of what the Americans were saying. Look, if the Americans are saying 100 million Christians have been killed in Nigeria, I should know. All right, I have my own contacts, but for you as a journalist, the important thing is not who said what, but what is the source. Now, the figures, the data should be available to us as the Christian Association of Nigeria, as the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Nigeria. We have our own database. There is nothing to suggest that 100 is it million or how many Christians are being killed every day. But most importantly, and I end here, we should be worried about the death of any Nigerian. No citizen of this country deserves to lose his or her life.
Indeed. On that note, Bishop Matthew Hassan Kukah, I want to thank you exceedingly for coming in. He is the Catholic Bishop of Sokoto and one of this country's most respected civil rights figures, conspicuous for his gallantry in pursuing truth and justice. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Thank you for being so gracious. Thank you.